I was driving home from a hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon when I saw her. I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. She was sitting on a bench outside the Tim Hortons on Commissioners Road, the one near the old Sears Plaza in London, Ontario. Her coat was the green one I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. But it was filthy now, the cuffs frayed, a tear along the shoulder seam she'd tried to mend with safety pins. She had a garbage bag at her feet and a paper cup in her hands, not coffee, empty, like she'd been holding it so long it had just become part of her hands. I pulled over so fast I nearly clipped the curb. "Fiona?" She looked up, and I saw something cross her face that I'll never forget as long as I live. It wasn't relief. It was shame, pure, naked shame, like I'd caught her doing something terrible. She looked away first. I got out of the truck and walked toward her, and by the time I reached the bench, my legs felt like someone else's legs. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at the ground, at the empty cup, at the cars going by on Commissioners, anywhere but at me. "Dad," she finally said, "please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't what, Fiona? Talk to me." She was 34 years old, my only child, the girl I'd taught to skate on the pond behind my brother's place in Strathroy, who'd cried for 2 days when her cat died, who'd called me from her dorm at Western the first week of university just to hear my voice because she was homesick. That girl was sitting outside a Tim Hortons holding an empty cup, and she didn't want me to ask questions. I sat down on the bench beside her and I didn't say anything, just sat there. The cold came up through the wood and I didn't move. After a while she started to cry. Not loudly, just quietly, the way exhausted people cry when they've run out of the energy to hold it together. I put my arm around her. That's all I did. I put my arm around her, and I waited. It took about 20 minutes before she told me, her husband, the man she'd been married to for 6 years, the man I'd shaken hands with at their wedding at the Idlewild Inn and genuinely believed was a decent person, had sold their house, the house on Talbot Street that they'd bought together in 2019, that she painted herself room by room on weekends, that had her garden in the back with the raised beds I'd helped build one long May weekend. He had sold that house 8 months ago without telling her. He'd been having an affair for over 2 years. The woman, someone he'd met through work, had moved into an apartment in the West End. When the sale went through on the Talbot house, he took his share of the equity and used it to put a down payment on a condo on Wonderland Road. With her, he gave Fiona a bank draft for her portion of the sale proceeds, $31,000. He put it in an envelope and left it on the kitchen counter of the house they were selling, next to her keys, on the last day she was allowed to be there. $31,000, and the clothes she could carry. That was 8 months ago. She'd been couch surfing at friends' places since then, but she hadn't wanted to burden anyone too long. She'd worked at a dental office part-time, but her hours had been cut. She'd applied for a bachelor unit in the Co-op building on Adelaide, and the waiting list was 11 months. Her savings ran out in October. She'd been sleeping in a shelter on Dundas Street the past 3 weeks, and coming to sit at this Tim Hortons during the day, because it was warm and nobody bothered her. 3 weeks. My daughter had been sleeping in a shelter for 3 weeks, and I hadn't known. I've thought about that a lot since. People ask, "How did you not know?" And I understand why they ask. I've asked myself the same question at 3 in the morning more times than I can count. The answer is something I'm not proud of. After my wife passed Fiona's mother, Margaret, I went through a bad stretch, longer than I admitted to anyone. I wasn't present. I was surviving, barely, and I'd become the kind of father who waited for his child to call instead of picking up the phone himself. Fiona had always been independent. She never wanted to worry me, and her husband, I'll call him what he was, a coward and a liar, had quietly made sure she was cut off. New phone number. She'd moved, so the address I had was wrong. When I tried to reach her at Christmas the year before, he'd texted me from her phone saying she was sick, and they'd call when she was better. I believed him. I want to say I should have done more. I should have driven to London instead of sitting in Sarnia waiting. That's on me and I'll carry it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I took her to my truck. I told her she was coming home with me and she started to argue and I said, "Fiona, I'm 63 years old and I have a 4-bedroom house and I'm asking you to come home." And something in her face broke open in a way that told me she'd been wanting someone to say exactly that for a very long time. She had almost nothing. The garbage bag held a few changes of clothes, her laptop, some documents she'd been careful to keep, her birth certificate, her SIN card, some paperwork from the house sale. She'd kept those documents in a Ziploc bag inside her laptop case. That detail stayed with me. She'd kept her documents protected even when she had nothing else. That's who my daughter is. We drove back to Sarnia that night. I made her a meal. Nothing special, just pasta with that jar sauce she used to like as a kid, the one with extra garlic, and she ate 2 full bowls without saying much. Afterward, she sat at the kitchen table, and I made tea, and she finally started to talk. Not just the facts, but the whole of it. The slow erosion. The way he'd spent years making her feel like her instincts were wrong. The way he'd handled all their finances and made her feel foolish for asking questions. The way she'd told herself it was fine, it was normal. This was just how marriage worked, until the day she came home to an empty house and a bank draft on the counter. I listened. I didn't say much. I'm not a man who's good at saying the right thing in emotional moments, but I'm good at listening. And that night listening was what she needed. She fell asleep on the couch before 10 o'clock. She hadn't slept properly in months, she told me later. That night, she slept for 11 hours straight. I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cold cup of tea and I thought about a man who had taken 6 years of my daughter's life, isolated her from the people who loved her, sold the roof over her head, and handed her $31,000 like that settled the account. I thought about him in a condo on Wonderland Road right now, probably asleep, warm, unbothered, having moved on entirely to his new life. I'm not a man who acts on anger. I worked for 30 years as an electrical estimator. And then ran my own small contracting firm. I understand that problems solved in anger create bigger problems. I know how to wait. I know how to think things through. But I also know that there is a difference between letting something go and letting someone believe there are no consequences. I wanted him to understand there are consequences. I spent the next 2 weeks making quiet inquiries. I have a friend, a retired paralegal named Gerald, who now, in his words, meddles for fun, who helped me understand what I was looking at legally. The house sale, we determined, had been legitimate in the technical sense. Both names were on the title. He'd had the legal right to initiate the sale, though the way he'd handled Fiona's share and the timing of his departure raised questions about whether there had been financial misconduct during the marriage. Gerald recommended a family lawyer in London named Patricia, who had, in Gerald's words, seen worse and enjoyed taking it apart. I paid for the consultation myself. I didn't tell Fiona at first. I didn't want to get her hopes up. Patricia reviewed everything Fiona had, the bank draft, the sale documents, the text message history, bank records Fiona had managed to hold on to. Patricia believed there was a reasonable case for a claim of unjust enrichment relating to how the matrimonial home proceeds had been structured, and possibly grounds to examine whether he had misrepresented their financial position during the marriage to Fiona's detriment. That was going to take time. That was the long game. The short game was something else. The man worked at a commercial real estate firm in London. He'd been there for 9 years, well regarded, Gerald told me. Good reputation in the industry. His new partner, the woman he'd left my daughter for, worked in the same industry, different company. They'd met at a conference in Toronto. They were, by all accounts, presenting themselves around town as a perfectly ordinary new couple. He had told almost no one at work what had actually happened, not the full picture. His story, apparently, was that the marriage had been difficult for years, and the separation had been mutual. Mutual. I thought about my daughter sleeping in a shelter on Dundas Street, and I thought about the word mutual, and I felt something harden in my chest. I drove to London on a Thursday morning. I didn't tell Fiona. I want to be clear about what I did because it was not dramatic. There was no confrontation. There was no shouting. I didn't go to his condo. I didn't go to his office. I went to see two people. The first was a woman named Brenda, who I knew from years ago. She and Margaret had been close, and she now sat on the board of a local community association that happened to be a client of his firm. I had coffee with Brenda at her kitchen table. I told her, calmly and factually, what had happened to my daughter. I didn't editorialize. I just told her Fiona had been married to this man. He had sold their house without warning her in any meaningful way. He had left her with $31,000 and no housing. She had been in a shelter. She was 34 years old and had spent months homeless in the city because of decisions this man made while she trusted him. Brenda listened with her hands around her coffee cup, and she didn't say a word until I finished. His firm handles our building's property management, she said. I know, I said. That contract is up for renewal in the spring. I didn't say anything. Brenda nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me, Douglas. I'm sorry about your daughter. She was always a sweet girl. I left after 20 minutes. The second person I went to see was his mother. This is the part people find surprising. His mother lived in a semi-detached in Byron, the West London neighborhood, a tidy brick place with a bird feeder in the front yard. I had met her 4 or 5 times over the years at family dinners. She was in her late 60s, a retired schoolteacher. She had always been polite to me. She had always seemed fond of Fiona. I knocked on her door on a Thursday afternoon. She opened it and looked at me with surprise and something that might have been guilt. Because I think, on some level, she knew. Douglas, she said. I need to talk to you, I said. Please. She let me in. We sat in her living room, and I told her the same things I'd told Brenda, the same calm accounting of what had happened. The house. The shelter. The $31,000. My daughter sitting on a bench outside a Tim Hortons holding an empty cup. The woman didn't deny any of it. She sat across from me with her hands folded, and she looked at the floor and she said, I told him it wasn't right. I told him. I know you're not responsible for what your son does, I said. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here because I think you should know the full picture, and because I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about it. She looked at me. He needs to be part of a real settlement. Not $31,000 that he calculated would be hard for her to fight over. A real settlement. She lost 6 years of career development because she supported his while they were married. She lost a home. She lost her footing. Patricia, her lawyer, will pursue it either way, but it goes faster and costs everyone less if your son decides to behave like an adult. His mother was quiet for a long time. I'll talk to him, she said. I should have talked to him harder before. I thanked her and drove home to Sarnia. I want to be honest here about why I went to those two people instead of going directly at him. Partly it was strategic. I knew that a man who didn't feel shame about what he'd done wasn't going to feel shame in front of me specifically. He'd chosen his path. What he was more likely to respond to was his professional reputation beginning to develop cracks, and his own mother looking at him differently. Both were already in motion. The other part of it was, I was afraid of what I would do or say if I actually stood in front of him. I'm not a violent man, but I was so angry that I didn't entirely trust myself, and I have enough self-knowledge to respect that. 3 weeks after my visit to Byron, Patricia received a call from a lawyer representing Fiona's ex-husband. He was open to negotiation. It took 4 months total. I paid Patricia's fees. I didn't tell Fiona until the process was almost finished, and when I did tell her, she cried and told me I shouldn't have done it. And I told her she should let me be her father, and she said, okay. The settlement was substantially better than $31,000. I won't give the number because it's her private business, but it was enough to allow her to put a real down payment on a small place of her own, in London, near the friends she'd reconnected with since coming back to herself. She found a full-time position at a larger dental practice on Wellington Road. She started sleeping properly. She called me one Sunday in April to tell me she'd planted tomatoes in pots on her new balcony, the same heirloom variety we used to grow in the backyard when she was small. I cried a little after I hung up. I'm not embarrassed to say that. As for him, I heard through Gerald that the community association contract was not renewed with his firm. I don't know how much weight that carried, or whether his mother's conversation with him changed anything in him, or whether he simply did the math and decided fighting was going to cost more than settling. I don't actually care which one it was. I'm not in the business of changing people. I'm in the business of protecting what's mine. He went on with his life. I assume he'll keep going on with it, but somewhere in the back of his mind, I hope he understands that the quiet old man from Sarnia who shook his hand at the Idlewild Inn all those years ago had a longer memory than he counted on, and more patience than he ever gave me credit for. My daughter called me last Sunday. She sounded like herself again. The real herself. The one who laughs too loud at her own jokes and has strong opinions about the correct way to make a roux, and sends me photos of birds she sees from her window with little captions about their personalities. That's all I wanted. That's all I ever wanted. I think about that bench on Commissioner's Road more than I let on. Not the anger, though the anger was real enough. What I think about is the shame on my daughter's face when she saw me walking toward her. That look told me everything about what the previous 2 years had done to her. She wasn't just without a home. She'd been made to feel like she deserved to be without one. Like asking for help was a weakness she couldn't afford. That's not something a house sale does to a person. That's something years of being quietly diminished does to a person. And I hadn't seen it coming because I hadn't been paying close enough attention. That part is on me. I'll say it plainly. There's a cost to going through grief with your eyes down, and sometimes the people you love most are the ones who pay it. I can't undo those 2 years. What I can do, what I did, was decide that the moment I understood the situation, I was going to act like someone who understood it, not frantically, not out of rage, carefully, and with everything I had. There's something I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, but just from living 63 years with my eyes open. The people who cause the most damage rarely expect to be held to account by quiet means. They expect either nothing or an explosion they can dismiss. What they don't expect is patience. What they don't expect is a retired man from Sarnia who does his research, pays a lawyer, has coffee with the right people, and knocks on a door in Byron on a Thursday afternoon. That kind of response requires a person to think clearly when their instinct is to act badly. And thinking clearly when you're furious is one of the harder things a person can practice. I don't always manage it. I managed it that time. Fiona had to find her own footing. I could pay for the lawyer. I could drive to London. I could make sure she knew she had somewhere to come home to. But the part where she rebuilt her confidence, found her job on Wellington Road, planted tomatoes on her balcony, that was all her. That took something in her. I don't think she knew she had until she had to find it. It takes a particular kind of steadiness to carry your documents in a Ziploc bag inside your laptop case when you have nothing else. That steadiness was always in her. Her situation just made it visible. What her ex-husband did wasn't complicated. It was ordinary selfishness, dressed up in legal paperwork and a story about a mutual separation. The consequence wasn't complicated either. It just took longer than he expected to arrive, and it came from a direction he wasn't watching. I've found that's usually how it works. Not dramatic, not immediate, just the natural weight of a person's choices eventually settling onto their shoulders, one quiet visit at a time. I'm not a man who needs him to suffer. I just needed my daughter to be okay. Everything else was in service of that. And she is okay now. Genuinely, solidly okay, in a way I can hear in her voice on Sunday mornings when she calls to tell me about the birds outside her window. That's the whole of it, really. That's what I wanted.